There is a particular kind of attention you have been keeping for so long that you no longer remember when it began. It is the attention that enters a room before your body does. You step into a house, a cafe, an office, the home of someone you love, and within the first breath, you have already taken the temperature of the place who is angry, but pretending not to be, who is afraid, who has been crying earlier in the day and washed their face before you arrived, who is performing wellness over a small grief. You did not decide to know these things. You knew them the way one knows the weather without consulting an instrument, and for most of your life, when you have tried to speak of this, others have told you that you are gifted, or that you are too sensitive, or that you imagine too much, or more recently, in this strange age, that you are an empath. You may have been told that you may have built a small private identity around the word, that you feel what others feel, that you walk into a room and know within 30 seconds whether the people who live there are at war. All of this is true. I am not here to take the word from you, but there is something underneath it that has not yet been named in your hearing. And it is the thing for which you have actually been paying year after year. In a coin you cannot exchange anywhere. What I have observed over many decades of listening to people sit in the chair across from mine is that the capacity you call sensitivity did not arrive as a gift. It arrived as a position, a post, somewhere very early in your life, earlier than memory can reach. With its small lantern you were placed, or you placed yourself at the threshold of a room, not the room you slept in, the other room, the one where the adults were not well, and where the not wellness was never named, and where someone had to feel what was happening in order for the household to continue functioning at all. You were that someone, and the post you took up then has never, to this day, been formally dissolved. The household ended. The people who lived in it have aged or scattered or died, but the contract did not dissolve. When the household dissolved, the Sentry was never relieved. This is the first thing I want to say to you, and I will return to it. What you have been calling empathy is, in many cases, the residue of a duty no child should have been given, and what you have been calling exile, that quiet, persistent sense of standing slightly outside every room you enter, of being among people without being among them, of being known by no one in the way you suspect. You could be known. This exile is not punishment for your sensitivity. It is the geography of the post itself. A sentry does not stand inside the room. A sentry stands at the threshold. That is what a sentry is. You have lived your whole adult life at a threshold, and you have wondered why you cannot find the inside of any room, and you have suspected in the small hours that the fault is in you. The fault is not in you. The fault is in a description of the situation that has never been accurate. Let me say more carefully, because the words went past too quickly. You are not exiled because you see too clearly. You are exiled because the seeing was never optional, and a seeing that is not optional is not a gift. It is a labor, and labor that no one acknowledges as labor produces a particular kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being unseen while you are seeing, of being the one who notices that the host is grieving while no one notices that the noticing has cost you something. You go home from such gatherings, tired in a way that sleep does not touch. You wake the next morning, and the tiredness is still there, waiting at the foot of the bed like a dog that has not been fed. I have known many people who lived inside this exhaustion for 40 years before they understood it was not a personality. It was a position. There is a difference. A personality is who you are. A position is where you were placed. The two have been so thoroughly confused in you that you take the second for the first, and you build your life around what you imagine is your nature, when in fact it is your stationing. I want to be careful here because I do not want to take from you anything that is truly yours. The capacity to feel what others feel, this is not nothing. It is not invented. It is not, as the more reductive minds of my own field once liked to say, a symptom in disguise. You do see clearly, you do feel accurately, the instrument is real, and it is finely calibrated, and the calibrations cost you a great deal to develop, but an instrument that was forged under conditions of necessity carries the heat of those conditions inside its metal forever. You can use the instrument, and you can love the instrument, and you can be grateful for what it has shown you, and you can still acknowledge that the forge was not chosen. There is something else I want to set down before this first hour ends, because it is the floor on which everything else will stand. The exile you live in is not merely social, it is structural. It is built into how the seeing itself works. Consider what happens when you walk into a room and immediately register that the woman in the corner is concealing something painful. The registration is instantaneous, but the registration also separates you from her because she does not know you have seen, and she would not wish for you to have seen, and the politeness of human life requires you to pretend you have not seen what you have already seen. So now there is a small lie between you, a small distance. Multiply this by every room you have entered in 40 years. The exile is not an event, it is an accumulation. It is the sum of all the small distances that opened the moment your perception arrived where your perception was not invited. And here is where the matter becomes more difficult, because most of what is said about people of your kind in books, in the magazines that line the shelves of stations, in the small luminous rectangles people now carry in their pockets, most of what is said treats this exile as a problem to be solved, as if the answer were to find your tribe, to find the other empaths, to find the people who see what you see. I have watched many people exhaust themselves searching for this tribe, traveling great distances, joining circles and groups and communities that promised recognition, only to discover that even there, even among those who used the same vocabulary, the exile did not lift. They came home heavier than they had left, and they concluded that they were defective in some new way, that even among their own they could not belong. But the conclusion is wrong. The exile is not the absence of a tribe. The exile is the cost of the position, and no tribe, however well-meaning, can relieve a sentry who has not yet understood that she is one The sentry must first know that she is at a post. She must first know that the post was assigned. She must first know that she has the authority, though no one has ever told her this, to ask whether the post is still needed, whether the war is still on, whether anyone is, in fact, still inside the room she has been guarding for 40 years, or whether the room has been empty for a long time, and only her vigilance remains faithful, patient, magnificent, and unnecessary. This is the proposition I will be unfolding in the hours we have together, that what you have been calling the burden of seeing is, in truth, the unrelieved duty of a watch that was never officially ended, that the exile you live in is the architecture of the post itself, and that the work in front of you, if there is work in front of you, and I think there is not to see less, and not to feel less, and not to find your people. The work is to walk slowly toward the door of the room you have been guarding, and to look inside, and to discover, perhaps for the first time, what is actually there. I will say no more for now. There is more here, but it must come in its time. Now, I want to take up the thing you have most likely been told about your condition, and to set it gently aside, not because it is false, but because it is incomplete in a way that has cost you another decade of confusion. You have been told in many languages and in many rooms that you are sensitive, that you are highly attuned, that you have a nervous system more porous than most, that you absorb the emotions of others, the way certain stones absorb water. The framework offered to you has been almost entirely a framework of input of what comes in, and the remedies offered to you have followed from that framing. Protect your energy, set boundaries, limit your exposure, cleanse yourself after encounters with difficult people. Learn to discern what is yours and what is not yours. I do not wish to mock this language, because some of it contains real practical wisdom, and the people who have offered it to you were often trying, with the tools they had, to ease something they could see was hurting you. But the language is built on a fundamental mistranslation, and until the mistranslation is corrected, no remedy built upon it will hold. The mistranslation is this: it treats you as a receiver, a vessel that is too open, a membrane that is too thin. And so the cure becomes a project of closing, of thickening the membrane, of fortifying the vessel, of becoming, in some measured way, less of what you are. Many of you have tried this. Many of you have built elaborate practices around the work of closing, and many of you have discovered, to your sorrow, that the closing does not actually close. It only adds a layer of exhaustion to the original exhaustion. This is because the seeing you do is not, in its essence, an act of reception. It is an act of work, active, sustained, skilled work. The kind of work a translator does, the kind of work a watchman does, the kind of work a tuner of pianos does when he leans his ear against the wood and listens for the small wrongness in a single string among many. You are not absorbing the room, you are reading the room. There is an immense difference between these two operations, and the entire literature of your condition has, with the best of intentions, confused them. A receiver is passive, a reader is active, A receiver can be protected by thicker walls. A reader cannot be protected by thicker walls, because the reading is not happening to the reader is doing the reading. To stop the reading, the reader would have to stop the reading, and the reader cannot stop, because the reading is not a choice. It was never a choice. It is the executed habit of a very early decision, a decision made before you had language, before you had a self in the ordinary sense that the safety of the household depended on someone keeping a continuous report on the inner weather of the people in it. That someone was you. And so the reading began, and it has not stopped, because no one has ever told the reader that she may stop. And the reader does not know she is reading. She thinks she is breathing. This is the first thing I would correct in what you have been told. You are not too open. You are working too hard. The fatigue you feel after a gathering is not the fatigue of absorption. It is the fatigue of a skilled and uninterrupted labor that has been mistaken by you and by everyone around you for a passive trait. You would not tell a translator working a 6-hour conference that she ought to be less open to language. You would tell her she has been working hard and that the work has tired her and that she ought to rest, and the rest she needs is not the rest of closing. It is the rest of being relieved. There is no remedy that helps you that does not begin with this distinction. None. I want to say something now about what is called diagnosis, because in this age I understand it has become very common for people of your kind to gather names for themselves, to be told they have one thing or another thing, or a small constellation of things, each with its initials, each with its protocol. I will not speak against the names. The names sometimes help. They give a person a place to stand for the first time, and a place to stand is not a small gift, but I want to point to something the names do not quite see, and it is this: a diagnostic name treats the condition as if it began inside the person, as if the person produced the symptom, as if were the person constituted differently, the symptom would not have arisen. This is, in some narrow technical sense, sometimes true, but it is in a much larger sense almost always false. What you have been calling pathology was not pathology, it was loyalty, astonishing, exhausting, lifelong loyalty to a household that needed a sentry, to a parent who could not regulate herself, to a father whose grief was too large to be borne by him alone, to a sibling who would have come apart had no one been watching. The symptom did not begin in you. The symptom is your end of a much older arrangement. To treat it as if it began in you is to ask the wrong question forever. The right question, and it is a harder question, and it is the one I would have you sit with, is not what is wrong with me. The right question is, whom have I been carrying, and at what cost, and by what arrangement that I never agreed to in any waking moment? When this question is asked, and asked seriously, something begins to shift. The shift is not pleasant at first. There is, in fact, a particular grief that opens here, because to ask whom you have been carrying is to admit that you have been carrying, and to admit that you have been carrying is to confront the fact that no one asked you whether you wished to, and no one, for the most part, has ever thanked you. You have been performing, for decades, an invisible labor that the household relied upon and never named. To see this is to feel, for a time, very angry, or very sad, or both. This is to be expected. I would not have you skip this part. The skipping of this part is what produces the dry, brittle, spiritualized version of your kind that one meets in certain circles, the person who has read all the books, who uses all the correct words, who has bypassed her own ordinary human anger by translating it directly into transcendence. I do not trust this person. I have rarely seen her come to ground. He tried. In a book I wrote long ago on the relationship between the ego and the unconscious, to set down something about the way an inner figure that has not been recognized begins to govern a life from beneath. The book was difficult, and few read it well, even at the time, but the essential matter is this: anything in the psyche that is not seen, that is not named, that is not given its proper weight, does not therefore stop operating. It operates with great force, and it operates with the particular cunning of the unseen, which is that it dresses itself in the clothes of fate. You come to believe that what is happening is simply how life is. You come to believe that the tiredness is your nature. You come to believe that the exile is your character. You come to believe that the relentless reading of rooms is the price of being who you are. None of this is fate. All of it is the operation of a contract that was signed under duress by a small child who had no other options, and that has remained in force only because no adult version of you has ever known she had the authority to renegotiate. I said then, and I have not yet found a way to say it more accurately, that until a person makes the unconscious conscious, it will direct her life, and she will call it fate. Notice the small precision of that last word. She will call it fate. The unconscious does not announce itself as the unconscious. It announces itself as the way things are, as the world, as you. The work of recognizing that what you have been calling your life is in fact a particular structure assembled long ago by a small person doing her best under conditions she did not author. This work is the beginning of any real freedom, not the rearranging of the outer house, not the cleansing of the energy field, not the finding of the tribe, the patient excavation of the original contract, and the discovery, written nowhere, that there was always an authority to revise it. Here, then, is the first reframe I would offer you, and I would have you sit with it before we go further. The exile you live in is not the result of being too open. It is the geography of a post you accepted before you could read or write. The fatigue you carry is not the cost of absorption. It is the wage of an uninterrupted labor. The diagnostic names you may have collected are not wrong, but they are downstream. They describe the shape of what you have been doing. They do not describe what you have been doing, or for whom, or why. And until the why is understood, no number of accurate downstream names will give you back your hours. I will say this once more, because it is the load-bearing wall of everything that follows. What you have been calling your sensitivity is the visible part of a much older arrangement. What you have been calling your exile is the architecture of the post itself. And what you have been calling pathology was, all along, the most loyal thing you have ever done. We will turn now, in the next hour, to the deeper machinery of this loyalty, to how it organizes not only your tiredness, but your relationships, your loves, your work, and the strange recurring shapes of your life. I want to be careful here, because the next room is darker, but you have stood at thresholds your entire life. You will not be afraid of one more. Let us go now into the deeper room, the one I have been circling. I want to describe to you the actual machinery of what you have been doing, not the surface of it, not the names that have been given to it, but the mechanism itself, the way the gears engage. And I must warn you that some of what I will say in this hour will be uncomfortable, because it will require you to relinquish a certain flattering picture of yourself that has, until now, made the exhaustion bearable. The picture is this: that you are sensitive because you are, in some essential way, more finely made than the people around you, that your suffering is the cost of a higher organization, that you see what others cannot see because something in you is, by nature, more attuned to the real. This picture has comforted you in dark moments, and I will not insult the comfort it has provided, but it is, in the end, a flattering surface laid over a more difficult truth, and the more difficult truth is the door we must now open. The truth is that the seeing you do, and the carrying you do, and the exile that follows from both these are not signs of higher organization. They are signs of a very specific kind of childhood arrangement, repeated so consistently and so early that it ceased to feel like an arrangement and began to feel like a self. In the household where you were formed, there was a particular kind of imbalance, one adult, perhaps both, perhaps in alternation, perhaps in collusion, could not bear his or her own inner weather. The weather was too large, the grief, or the rage, or the unspoken disappointment, or the slow despair, or the unmetabolized history of the generation before was too heavy for the adult who carried it. And so it spilled into the room, it spilled into the silences at the table, it spilled into the precise way a door was closed in the evening, it spilled into the way one parent looked at the other when something was about to be said and then was not said. A child in such a household has two options. Broadly speaking, the first is not to notice, to grow a thick skin early, to harden, to live inside the noise, the way a person who lives near a railway eventually stops hearing the trains. Many children take this option. They become the ones who later say, with some pride, that they were unaffected. They are often wrong about this. The noise has merely gone underground, but they are spared the second option. Which was yours? The second option is to develop very early an exquisite apparatus for reading the weather of the adults, so that one may know at any given moment how to behave, how to hide, when to be small, when to be charming, when to be absent altogether. This apparatus is not, as I said earlier, a passive thing. It is an active, skilled, continuously refined instrument of survival. And the child who develops it does so because the adults cannot regulate themselves. and someone in the system must do the regulating, or the system will tear. The child becomes, in effect, the regulator of adults who could not regulate themselves. This is the role you took. This is the post you accepted before you knew you were accepting anything. And here is where the matter becomes painful, and where I must ask you to set aside the more flattering version of the story. Your seeing is not, in its origin, a higher faculty. It is a survival adaptation of extraordinary refinement, developed under conditions that no child should ever face. The instrument is real. The instrument is precise. The instrument is, in its way, beautiful as any highly developed thing is beautiful, but it was forged in a fire, and the fire was the inability of the adults around you to bear themselves, and the work of the instrument was, originally, the management of those adults, so that you might continue to exist in proximity to them. I knew a man, he came to me in late middle age, who described to me, over many months, a particular sensation he had carried since boyhood. He said that when he entered a room, even now, even decades after his mother had died, he could tell within a few seconds whether the people in the room were safe. He did not mean physically safe. He meant safe to be near, safe in the sense that one could relax in their presence without later paying for it. And he had built his entire adult life around this capacity. He was admired for it. He was a man others sought out in difficult moments. He had a profession that drew upon this capacity, and he was very good at it. And yet, when he came to me, he was tired in a way that he could not name. He was tired in the bones. He was tired in a way that no holiday could touch and no sleep could relieve. And we worked, he and I, for a long time before he could see what I will now tell you. He saw that the capacity he had been admired for was the same capacity by which, at the age of 4, he had monitored the front door of his house for the sound of his father's footsteps, to know whether the man would come home angry or merely depressed. The instrument was the same instrument. The post was the same post. The household had ended 40 years before. The post had not. This is what I mean when I say the contract was not dissolved when the household dissolved. The household is a temporary arrangement. It ends, people die, or move away, or grow up, but the structure that was built in you by the household persists, because structures of the psyche do not know that time has passed. They know only that the work they were built to do has not yet been called complete, and so the work continues. The reading continues. The vigilance continues. You enter a room now, in your 40s, or 50s, or 60s, and the same apparatus that monitored your father's footsteps is monitoring the new colleague at the meeting, the friend of a friend at the dinner, the stranger at the bus stop. The apparatus does not distinguish. It cannot distinguish. It was not given a clock. And here is the contrarian thing I must say, because it is essential, and because no one will say it for me. If your seeing is a survival adaptation, then you cannot fight it. You cannot fight it because it is not your enemy. It is the very thing that kept you alive, and the body remembers this with a deep, wordless loyalty. Every attempt you have made to shut the instrument off, to harden, to become less sensitive, to thicken the membrane, every such attempt has failed because the body will not allow it. The body knows that to shut off the instrument is to die. The body learned this when you were 3. The body has not been informed that the danger has passed, and so the instrument continues to operate with the full force of survival behind it, and you continue to be tired, and you continue to wonder what is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. The body is doing exactly what it was trained to do, with admirable precision, in defense of a life that no longer requires defending. The exhaustion is the exhaustion of a defense that has not been told the war is over. This has consequences far beyond your private fatigue, and I want to describe some of them because they will explain certain shapes in your life that have probably puzzled you. The first consequence is that you tend to gravitate in love and in friendship toward people who require regulating. You did not choose this. The instrument did. The instrument was built to engage with dysregulated adults, and the instrument feels itself most useful, most at home, most in its proper element when it is engaged with a dysregulated adult. So you find yourself again and again in relationships with people who are subtly or overtly unwell, and you find yourself doing for them what you once did for your parents. You read them, you manage their weather, you arrange yourself around their fluctuations, and you tell yourself that this is love, because the feeling of being needed in this particular way is the deepest, oldest, most familiar feeling you possess. It feels like love because it is the closest thing to love that you ever knew. But it is not love, it is the executed habit of the post, and the post does not know it is at a post. It thinks it is being itself. The second consequence is that you tend, in your work, to be drawn into roles where this same capacity is required. You become the colleague to whom others bring their troubles. You become the manager whose team feels safe with her. You become the friend everyone calls in a crisis. You become, in 1,000 small ways, the household sentry transposed onto a larger stage, and here, too, you are admired, you are valued, you are perhaps even paid for it, and the post grows wider and wider, and the labor never ends, and you cannot understand why, with so many people loving and needing you, you feel so profoundly alone. You feel alone because the post is, by its nature, a position of solitude. The sentry is not inside the room she guards. She is at the threshold. She watches over the people inside, but she is not among them. This was true when you were 4 years old, watching the front door for your father, while your mother sat in the kitchen with her cup of cold tea. It is true now, decades later, when you sit at the head of a table surrounded by people who love you and who do not know that you are still, in some essential part of yourself, on watch. The exile is not a defect in your relationships. The exile is the position itself, persisting underneath all the relationships, because the position has never been formally relieved. The third consequence, and the one that reaches the furthest, is that this arrangement does not begin with you, and it does not end with you unless something interrupts it. I have come to think that what we call the parental complex, when traced honestly, is rarely a matter of 2 generations. It is a matter of 4 or 5 or 7 or more. Your mother could not bear her inner weather, because her mother could not bear hers, because hers could not bear hers. Somewhere far back, perhaps in a village whose name you do not know, in a century whose dates you have forgotten, something happened that no one was permitted to grieve. The ungrieved thing did not vanish. It became inheritance. It traveled forward through bodies, through habits of speech, through the particular silences that fell at certain dinner tables, through the way certain words were never used, through the children who were trained, each in turn, to manage what could not be spoken. You are at the end of this line, or perhaps in the middle of it. The post you accepted was not freshly built. It was very old already when it was handed to you. Generations of children before you stood at the same threshold, watching the same kind of weather in different houses, in different languages. You are one of them. This is why, when you try to address your fatigue as if it were yours alone, it does not yield. It does not yield because it is not yours alone. You are tired with a tiredness that has been accumulating for a long time in many people, and that has finally arrived in you. There's a certain dignity in this, if you can see it. You are not a defective individual, you are the latest carrier of something very old. And to recognize that you are a carrier is also to recognize for the first time that the carrying might be set down, not because you have failed, because you have, at long last, completed what you were given to complete. And the next thing in front of you is something else entirely. I will not yet tell you what that something else is. We have 1 more hour together, and it will turn on this very question. But I will say this much. Before we pause, the deepest mistranslation of your condition, the one underneath all the others, is the assumption that the post is yours. It is not yours. It was assigned, and what is assigned can, in principle, be relinquished. We will speak in the next hour of what relinquishing actually means, and of what is on the other side of it. There is more here, but it must come in its time. We come now to the final hour, and I want to say at the outset that the words I will use here are the most difficult ones, because they describe something that cannot quite be described, only approached, the way one approaches a deer at the edge of a clearing, slowly, without speaking, knowing that the slightest false movement will scatter what one has come to see. What is on the other side of the post? Let me come at this carefully, because there is a great deal of nonsense written about it, and I do not wish to add to the nonsense. The popular literature would have you believe that on the other side of the post is freedom, or peace, or what is sometimes called your authentic self, as if there were a small luminous person waiting inside you who has been smothered by the position and who will, upon the position's relinquishment, step forward and live the life you were always meant to live. I have not, in many decades of careful watching, ever seen this happen. I have seen many things happen on the other side of relinquishment. I have not seen that. What I have seen is more modest and in some ways more strange. What I have seen is that when a person at long last begins to understand that the post she has been keeping was assigned and that she has the authority to ask whether it is still needed, a particular kind of quiet descends, not the quiet of resolution, not the quiet of a problem solved, the quiet of a room she has never sat in before, a room that was there all along, somewhere behind the threshold she has been guarding, and that she had never thought to enter because her work was outside. At the door, she enters this room, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, and she discovers that it is not empty. There is a fire in it. There has been all along. This is the image I would have you take from this final hour. The fire in the inner room. It has been burning patiently for as long as you have been alive. You did not light it. You cannot put it out. It is not dependent on your vigilance for its existence. It does not require your reading of others to sustain it. It is the thing in you that is not the post, the thing that was there before the post was assigned, and that has been waiting in a kind of quiet that is older than any of your symptoms, for you to come in and sit down. I want to be careful, because the moment one speaks of such a thing, the language of mysticism rushes in and steals the precision. I am not speaking of a higher self. I am not speaking of a soul in the religious sense, though I do not exclude what religion has tried to point toward. I am speaking of something more ordinary and more astonishing, the fact that beneath the position you took up at the age of 3, there is a person who was there before the position and who is still there now. Underneath all the labor, this person has not aged at the same rate as you have. She has not been worn down by the same things. She has been, in a sense that I cannot quite explain, except by pointing, preserved. The post did its work. The post kept the household from collapsing onto her, and in doing so, it also kept her safe in a small interior chamber that no one, including yourself, has been permitted to enter for 40 or 50 years. To understand this is to understand why the relinquishment of the post is so much more difficult than the popular literature suggests. The post is not relinquished by a decision. The post is not relinquished by reading a book or attending a workshop or saying the right words to oneself in front of a mirror. The post is relinquished slowly and painfully, and often with considerable grief. When the person who has been keeping it finally walks to the door of the room she has been guarding, looks inside, and discovers that there is, in fact, someone there, that the room was not empty, that the watch was not in vain, but that the one who needed watching over was not the household, and not the parents, and not the others in the room outside. It was the small person inside the room, the one she has been guarding all along, the one she did not know she was guarding, because the guarding was directed outward, and the inner room was so quiet that she assumed it was empty. In a long work I wrote on the meeting of opposites in the late stages of an analysis, a work that few have read carefully, and that perhaps fewer should have read at all without preparation. I tried to describe what happens when the parts of the psyche that have been separated by long necessity finally come into the same room. I will not rehearse what I said there, because the language was technical and the matter is not, in the end, technical. The matter is simply this. At a certain point, the sentry and the one she has been guarding meet. They have not met before. They were always in the same person, but they were arranged in such a way that they could not see each other, because the sentry was facing outward and the one inside could not, dared not, call out. The meeting is unspectacular. There are no trumpets. There is only a slow recognition, often arrived at through tears that surprise the one who sheds them, that the watch has been kept faithfully, and that the one watched over has been alive all along, and that the two of them are and have always been one person when this recognition occurs, and I cannot tell you when it will occur for you or by what door, only that it does occur for those who keep walking toward it. A particular kind of redistribution begins. The seeing does not stop. The instrument is not destroyed. The capacity that has been forged in you remains, because nothing real in the psyche is ever simply undone. But the seeing begins gradually to serve a different purpose. It no longer serves the survival of the household, because the household is not there. It begins, instead, to serve the life of the one who sees. You begin to use the instrument as a translator, uses her languages for the work she has chosen, in the hours she has chosen, in the service of the people she has chosen, rather than as a sentry uses her vigilance, continuously, without cease, in service of no one in particular, because the threat is no longer specific. I want to say something now about anger, because no honest account of this passage can omit it. When a person begins to understand that the post she has kept for 40 years was assigned without her consent, and that the labor she has performed was largely uncompensated, and that the exile she has lived in was the structural consequence of a position she did not choose, she becomes, for a time, angry. The anger is appropriate. The anger is, in fact, a sign of health, a sign that the inner person, the one who was kept safe in the chamber, is at last allowed to feel what was felt on her behalf and never permitted to surface. Let the anger come. Do not perform spiritual bypass on it. Do not rush to forgive anyone. The forgiveness, if it comes at all, will come in its own time, and any forgiveness that arrives before the anger has been honestly felt is not forgiveness. It is the post, attempting one last time to manage the situation by quieting what should not be quieted. There's a passage I wrote many years ago now that I will set down for you in the form in which I have come to say it. I wrote that until a person makes the unconscious conscious, it will direct her life, and she will call it fate. I have said this before in our hours together, and I say it again now, because we have come at last to the point where the saying can be understood. The post you have been keeping was unconscious. It directed your life. You called it fate, because that is what an unconscious arrangement always feels like from inside. When the arrangement is made conscious, when you see the post for what it is, and the contract for what it is, and the assignment for what it was, fate begins to give way to life. Not a perfect life, not a life without difficulty, but a life that is no longer being lived on behalf of someone else's unbearable weather, a life that is, finally, yours. I want to speak to a question you may be carrying, because it is the question almost everyone carries at this point in the work, and it deserves a direct answer. The question is, but who will I be if I am not the one who watches? The capacity for watching has been so thoroughly woven into your sense of self that to imagine yourself without it is to imagine a stranger. And there is a fear, quiet but persistent, that beneath the post there is nothing, that you are the post, that without it you would dissolve, that the watching is all you are. I will tell you what I have observed. The fear is wrong, but the fear cannot be argued out of you. It can only be discovered to be wrong by living past the moment when it predicted you would dissolve, and finding that you have not. The first time you enter a room and do not immediately scan it for the inner weather of those present, perhaps because you are too tired, perhaps because something has shifted in you, that day you will notice with some surprise that the room contains you, that you are in it, that you have been, perhaps for the first time in your adult life, a person among people rather than a sentry at a threshold. The surprise will be considerable. You may, at first, distrust it. The post will offer to come back very politely, the way an old servant offers to return to duties she has performed for so long that she does not know what else to do. You may gently decline, or you may not on that particular evening, and the post will resume, and that is also acceptable. The relinquishment is not a single act, it is a long, gradual repatriation of a function to its proper proportion. The instrument that was once your entire identity becomes, over time, one of the things you can do in the hours when it is needed, for the people for whom it is appropriate. The rest of the time, the instrument rests. The sentry sits down by the fire. She is still herself. She has not been destroyed. She has merely been, at long last, relieved. And here I will give you the name I have been circling for these 4 hours, because we have arrived at the place where the naming will not collapse the thing it names. What you have been calling the quiet exile of seeing too clearly is the unrelieved condition of a watch that was never officially ended. The watch was real, the seeing was real, the cost was real, none of it was wasted. The household you came from required what you gave it, and without what you gave it, something would have broken that did not break. You did your work. You did it without thanks, without acknowledgement, without compensation, and without rest. You did it for decades, and the work is, in any meaningful sense, complete. The household has ended. The contract, though it has not yet been formally dissolved on your end, can be dissolved. The authority to dissolve it has been in you all along. You did not know it was there, because no one ever told you, but it has been there since the beginning, waiting for the moment when you would understand that you had it. The sentry, when at last relieved of her post, does not vanish. She turns and she walks inside and she sits down by the fire that has been burning all along in the room you thought was empty. She does not stop seeing, she does not stop feeling. The instrument she carries is still hers, still finely made, still capable of what it has always been capable of. But the watch is over. The household has ended. The fire is warm, and the person she has been guarding all these years, the one in the inner room, she rises. When the sentry sits down, and she crosses the small distance between them, and she places her hand on the sentry's shoulder, and the two of them, who were never two, become at last what they have always been, one person, yours, at home, for the first time, inside the only life that was ever actually yours to live.
This has been Carl Jung Original, a space where the patterns most people live through can finally be named. Voice and imagery, AI assisted interpretation and framing, original work. Until next lecture.